Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving deep into the world of evolutionary psychology. We're going to explore how the challenges our ancestors faced, way back when, shape the way we think and behave, even today in the modern world. Our guide for this journey is Evolutionary Psychology, The New Science of the Mind by David M. Buss.
It's a fascinating area of
Yeah.
study. We often just go about our daily lives without realizing how deeply connected we are to our evolutionary past.
It's true. I mean, have you ever thought about why you can't resist those sugary treats even when you know they're not good for you?
Hmm.
Or why so many people are terrified of spiders, even the tiny harmless ones?
These reactions, as common as they are, might actually be echoes of survival mechanisms from our ancestors. Evolutionary psychology suggests that. Many of our modern behaviors are rooted in those very needs.
Our brains are basically carrying around a set of ancient tools that helped our ancestors thrive, but are they really that useful in today's world?
That's the question, isn't it? Some are definitely more helpful than others. Take our love for sugary foods, for example. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors needed high-calorie energy sources, like honey, to survive. But today, with processed foods and added sugar everywhere, those cravings can lead to health problems.
That makes sense. It's like our brains haven't quite caught up to the abundance of food we have now, so it's this mismatch between our evolved tendencies and our modern environment that's causing issues.
Exactly. And this mismatch applies to more than just our diets. Think about our pickiness when it comes to new foods. We call this neophobia, and it was beneficial for our ancestors, who had to be wary of potential toxins in unfamiliar plants.
So we can thank our ancestors for our picky eating habits, but could this aversion to new things actually be holding us back in some ways today? Like trying new cuisines or expanding our palates?
Yeah. It's an interesting point. Our ancestors benefited from sticking to known safe foods. But in today's world, where we have access to a wider variety of safe and healthy options, neophobia might limit our dietary diversity and potentially even prevent us from enjoying new experiences.
This is giving me a lot to think about already. So it seems like these ancient tools aren't always so helpful in our modern world.
That's the complex thing about evolutionary psychology. What was adaptive for our ancestors may not always be beneficial in today's context.
It's all about understanding that context, and this book explores that in such fascinating ways, looking beyond just food preferences to things like our habitat choices. I was really intrigued by the section on the savanna hypothesis.
Ah, yes, the idea that we're drawn to open spaces with scattered trees, because they resemble the African savanna where humans first evolved.
It's amazing to think that our preference for a certain type of landscape could be driven by something so primal. Do you think that holds true for people who, say, grew up in completely different environments?
That's a great question, and it's something researchers are still exploring. Some studies suggest that even people who have never seen a savanna still show a preference for these types of landscapes.
Wow, that's pretty mind-blowing.
It really highlights how deeply ingrained these evolutionary influences can be.
Hmm.
And it's not just about visual preferences either. Think about our reactions to things like heights, snakes, or even rotting food.
Okay, now, those don't sound very appealing, but you're saying there's an evolutionary reason why they trigger such strong reactions.
Absolutely. Our ancestors who were cautious about heights were less likely to fall and injure themselves. Those who had a healthy fear of snakes avoided potentially venomous bites. And rotten food, well, that could have meant serious illness or even death.
So these things, while unpleasant, were essentially protecting our ancestors from harm. It's like a built-in alarm system.
Exactly. Fear and disgust, as negative as they can feel, played a crucial role in keeping our ancestors alive long enough to pass on their genes. And these evolutionary pressures didn't just shape our responses to the physical environment. They also played a significant role in how we interact with each other, especially when it comes to choosing a mate.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The book talks about how men and women evolved different mating strategies. So are we talking about, like, a battle of the sexes here?
Not exactly a battle, but definitely different approaches, driven by our biological roles in reproduction. Remember, we're talking about general patterns that emerged over thousands of years, not hard and fast rules that apply to every single individual.
Right, of course. So let's break it down. What kind of traits did women evolve to prioritize in a potential mate?
Think about the immense challenges women face throughout human history: pregnancy, childbirth, and raising children. Especially in harsh environments, required a significant investment of time, energy, and resources.
So it makes sense that they wouldn't just choose any partner to take on that challenge with.
Exactly. Women needed partners who could provide for them and their children, protect them from danger, and offer long-term support.
Okay, so basically someone who was reliable, resourceful and committed.
That's a great way to put it. And those needs likely shape the evolution of women's mate preferences. The book highlights factors like resources, social status, willingness to commit, ambition, and dependability.
These qualities seem less about romance and more about practicality, like a survival strategy.
In a way, yes. Remember, this is all happening on an unconscious level. Our ancestors weren't necessarily thinking, I need a partner with high social status. These preferences were likely driven by a deep-seated drive to ensure the survival of their offspring.
So fascinating how these things connect. Now, on the flip side, what about men's mating strategies? What were the driving forces behind their choices?
Men faced a different set of evolutionary pressures. From a purely biological perspective, they could potentially father many children, with relatively little investment compared to women. But there was a key challenge they had to overcome: paternity uncertainty.
Paternity uncertainty. What does that mean?
Unlike women who are always certain of their biological connection to their children, men could never be 100% sure a child was theirs.
Wow, I hadn't really thought about it that way before. How did that uncertainty shape their behavior?
It likely played a role in how much they invested in parenting. If a man wasn't absolutely sure a child was his, he might have been less inclined to dedicate resources and energy to raising them.
That makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint, although it might sound a bit harsh in our modern context.
Of course, we're not condoning this behavior, simply trying to understand it from an evolutionary perspective. It's important to remember that our understanding of morality and social norms has evolved significantly over time.
Right. It's not about justifying behavior, but rather understanding where these tendencies might come from.
Exactly. And paternity uncertainty wasn't the only factor influencing men's mate choices. Another significant element was youth and beauty.
So, are we talking about the classic stereotype of men being drawn to physical appearance?
It's not as superficial as it might seem. From an evolutionary perspective, youth and beauty were seen as signals of fertility, indicating a woman's potential to bear healthy children.
So, it's less about aesthetics and more about biological cues.
Precisely. It all goes back to the fundamental drive to pass on one's genes to the next generation.
This is shedding a whole new light on how we view mate preferences. But it's not just about finding a partner, right? The book also delves into the complexities of family dynamics.
Yes, and this is where the concept of genetic relatedness becomes particularly relevant. The book explores the idea that parents are driven by an unconscious urge to ensure their genes are passed on, leading them to invest more in offspring who are likely to survive and reproduce.
It's like an instinct to ensure your genetic legacy continues.
Exactly. But this doesn't mean all children receive equal investment. One of the most interesting points the book raises is the difference in investment we often see between step-parents and biological parents.
Why is that? I mean, shouldn't love and care be equal regardless of biological connection?
Ideally, yes. But we can't ignore the powerful influence of our evolutionary history. Step-parents, being genetically unrelated to their stepchildren, don't have the same direct stake in passing on their genes through those children.
So even though we might hope for step-parents to love and care for their stepchildren equally, there's this underlying evolutionary pressure that can sometimes influence their behavior.
It's not a conscious decision. But these subtle biases shaped by our evolutionary past can play a role in family dynamics.
This makes you wonder how much of our behavior is truly driven by free will versus these deep-seated evolutionary influences.
It's a question philosophers have been debating for centuries, and evolutionary psychology offers a fascinating perspective on this age-old debate.
Now, beyond the difference between step-parents and biological parents, the book also mentions another factor that can influence how much a parent invests: mating opportunity costs. What exactly are those?
This concept applies particularly to men and refers to the potential for a man to find additional mates. If mating opportunities are plentiful, a man might be less inclined to dedicate himself to the long-term care of a single partner and her offspring.
So a man's investment in parenting could be influenced by how attractive he perceives himself to be and how many other potential mates he thinks are available.
Precisely. It's almost like an unconscious cost-benefit analysis playing out in the mating game.
That's a really intriguing way to think about it. It challenges our assumptions about what drives parental behavior.
Right. It suggests that these decisions aren't always purely driven by conscious choice or social norms.
This deep dive is really making me question everything I thought I knew about human behavior. But amidst all this talk about mating strategies and parental investment, it's easy to forget that we're also capable of incredible acts of kindness and selflessness.
It's true. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of evolutionary psychology: altruism.
That's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? If evolution is all about survival of the fittest, why would we help others, especially those who aren't directly related to us? Wouldn't that put us at a disadvantage?
It seems counterintuitive, but there are several theories that attempt to explain this behavior. One of the most prominent is the concept of reciprocal altruism. It suggests that helping others, even strangers, could be beneficial in the long run if those favors are returned down the line.
So you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It's like a prehistoric social contract.
Exactly. It's a form of cooperation that benefits both parties involved over time, even if there's a short-term cost to the individual.
But what if someone takes advantage and never reciprocates? Wouldn't that system fall apart?
That's a valid concern. But evolutionary psychologists believe that over time, those who consistently cheat the system would be identified and ostracized from the group. Their reputation would suffer, making it harder for them to benefit from future cooperation.
So it's like a built-in mechanism to weed out freeloaders and encourage fair play.
Exactly. And it's not just about direct reciprocity. There are other theories as well, like indirect reciprocity. This suggests that even if someone hasn't directly benefited from your actions, your reputation for being helpful can attract others to cooperate with you.
So it's like building a good reputation for being a helpful person. Increases your chances of getting help in the future.
Precisely. It's a way of signaling your value to the group, even if the benefits aren't immediate. And there's also the concept of costly signaling, where individuals might engage in altruistic acts as a way to demonstrate their resources or abilities to potential mates or allies.
It's like saying, look how generous and capable I am. I would be a valuable partner or ally.
Exactly. It's a way of showcasing your strengths and increasing your social standing.
It's fascinating to think about all these layers of motivation behind something as seemingly simple as helping others. It really challenges the idea that altruism is purely selfless.
It highlights the complexity of human behavior. We're not just driven by self-interest, but also by this intricate web of social dynamics and evolutionary pressures.
And as much as we like to think we're in control of our behavior, it seems like a lot of it is happening beneath the surface, driven by forces we might not even be aware of.
It's a humbling thought, isn't it? But understanding these forces can give us incredible insights into ourselves and the world around us.
This deep dive has been mind-blowing so far. But we've talked a lot about cooperation and altruism. What about the darker side of human nature? We can't ignore the fact that aggression and conflict are also recurring themes throughout history.
You're right, we can't shy away from those aspects. And as unpleasant as they are, aggression and violence likely serve some important functions for our ancestors.
Okay, now I'm really curious. How could something as destructive as aggression be beneficial from an evolutionary standpoint?
Well, it could have been a way to compete for resources, defend territory, establish dominance within a group, or even deter rivals from stealing mates.
So in a world where resources were scarce and survival was constantly at stake, aggression might have been a necessary tool.
Exactly. It's a reminder that human nature is complex and multifaceted, capable of both great kindness and terrible cruelty.
It's a duality that we see playing out even today.
Yes, understanding this duality is crucial for navigating the complexities of human behavior, both individually and as a society.
We've covered so much ground today, from our cravings for sugar to the complexities of mate selection, family dynamics, altruism, and aggression. It's been an incredible journey through the landscape of evolutionary psychology.
It really is remarkable to consider how all these seemingly disparate aspects of human behavior can be traced back to our evolutionary roots.
It's like we've been piecing together a puzzle, revealing this hidden history that's encoded in our minds and continues to shape our thoughts and feelings and actions.
And that's the beauty of evolutionary psychology. It offers a framework for understanding why we are the way we are, connecting our modern lives to the challenges and triumphs of our ancestors.
It's given me so much to think about already. But before we wrap up, I'm curious, if so much of our behavior is driven by these unconscious evolutionary pressures, does that mean we're essentially at their mercy? Do we have any free will?
That's a great question, and one that sparks a lot of debate.
Mm.
Evolutionary psychology doesn't claim that we're robots programmed by our genes. It simply suggests that we have certain predispositions, certain tendencies that were shaped by the forces of natural selection.
So it's not a deterministic view of human behavior?
Not at all. We still have the capacity for conscious thought, rational decision-making, and learning. We're not just slaves to our instincts.
That's reassuring. So how do we reconcile these two seemingly opposing forces, our evolved tendencies and our capacity for free will?
by understanding the interplay between them. It's like having a toolbox full of tools. Some of those tools were passed down to us from our ancestors, and they might be helpful in certain situations. But we also have the ability to create new tools,
Hmm.
modify existing ones, and choose which tools are best suited for the task at hand.
So we're not just inheriting these behaviors, we're also shaping and adapting them to fit our modern world.
Exactly. Awareness is key. By understanding our evolutionary heritage, we can gain insights into our motivations, biases, and tendencies. And this awareness can empower us to make more conscious and informed choices about how we live our lives.
This deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening. It's like you've given us a new lens through which to view human behavior, one that acknowledges the powerful influence of our evolutionary past, but also emphasizes our capacity for growth and change.
I'm glad you found it insightful. And remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Evolutionary psychology is a vast and constantly evolving field, with so much more to explore.
Well, you've definitely piqued my curiosity. I'm eager to learn more. But before we sign off, is there any final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Perhaps this. Now that you have a deeper understanding of how evolution has shaped our minds and behaviors, take a look around. Observe the world. Observe yourself. And see if you can spot these ancient influences at play. You might be surprised by what you discover.
That's a great challenge for our listeners. It's like we're sending them off on their own mini deep dives, and who knows what fascinating insights they might uncover. Thank you so much for guiding us on this journey through the fascinating world of evolutionary psychology. It's been a truly enlightening experience.
The pleasure was all mine. I always enjoy diving into these topics and exploring the complexities of what makes us human.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it as thought-provoking and insightful as we did. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the mysteries of the human experience.